So good morning everybody. Thanks for joining us to this event today to launch the Tallinn Guidelines on national minorities and the media and the digital age. Thank you also to the hopefully many people who are following this event online, and we will have also a possibility to interact with us during the discussion. Madam President, Foreign Minister, we are very pleased, we are honored, in fact, to have you here for the opening of this event today. I still remember, Madam President, the discussion we had, was the Maritime Museum, where we had a dinner during the Leonard Mendy conference, and we were discussing the work we are starting to do on developing the guidelines with the support of many eminent experts. And we were thinking that Tallinn is, in a way, the digital capital of Europe, and as a country that has its own experiences with minorities, would be a very appropriate venue, and not only for placing the event, but also for leaving its name on the guidelines. So thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Minister, for your support for this event, and maybe before developing further the concept, I would like to ask you to open this discussion with a few introductory considerations. Madam President,
thank you. And really, High Commissioners, and I cannot thank you enough for having indeed named these guidelines after Tallinn. And I know it's win-win, because if it's digital, then if you have Estonia or Tallinn somewhere, then people realize that this means business. People who are close to the subject matter have obviously been participating. But you know, for us it is also your recognition that we've had a long relationship during the last 30 years, and it has always not been very easy. And I just come from the meeting with Estonian local governments, and I was also very proud to tell them that this is also the recognition of our achievements on how to bring different communities closer to each other. And I would like to stress closer. We are not seeking to merge. We are seeking to have closeness, friendliness, coziness. I just come from African Union meeting, and they say always they are friends and brothers, and I think that's also felt in the air there, that the atmosphere, this friendliness, this we give hand to each other, we help each other. This is also very much present here in Tallinn, and I see this as an elegant recognition of our progress over the last 30 years as well. And I'm really extremely grateful for this. And we also still have a lot of work to do, of course. We need to continue to make sure that also in the internet, our own language develops, as is also in the guidelines. Countries are invited to make sure their languages are developed also in the digital sphere. How to promote what is nice to do, what is not so nice to do. I think it's all very well precisely put together, but of course it is not prescriptive, and this is also what I appreciate about these guidelines. It's not prescriptive, it's a food for thought, and everybody can find a lot to think here about it. I'm also proud to say that Estonian language, if you consider Estonian proportion in the world, Estonian speakers proportion, we are 10 times overrepresented in the internet, which means that you can do a lot of beneficial work online to make sure that your language and culture is not annihilated or overtaken by bigger cultures, but it is really supported by the digital environment. As a president of a proud European Union member state country, I think it's our obligation, because having opened the job market in Europe for everybody to live and work everywhere, absolutely everywhere, it's quite clear that giving out this kind of permission to people, you have to support it with your state action, which means, yes, I want Estonians to work in Spain, in Italy, in France, and elsewhere, and Finland, of course, but I have an obligation to follow them online with our own language, culture, education methods and models. And I hope Estonia will continue pioneering also this kind of thinking. I also believe that digital is a wonderful equalizer. It does indeed give even the smallest groups, smallest nations, more dispersed people, a common ground where they can come together, because geography is dead, as we know already now. And in internet, everybody has a lot of options, possibilities, which means that we need to continue developing computer literacy. And also I think we need to continue demanding that those who provide us with digital services, and mostly they are private sector companies, that they do think of multilingualism and the variety of culture more and more. And Estonia is also an observing member of the Francophonia organization, international organization. It's not just because we like French. Actually, there are very few French speakers in Estonia. But it is because we believe that if the digital tools become flexible enough to during conversation, during writing, to smoothly move from one language to another between big languages, then the added cost is not too big to make sure that this also continues to happen in the smaller language environments. And I think this is also something which we need to work with and make sure that will happen. And there is another challenge. There are languages which are almost extinct. There are languages in which you cannot go to school today. I think making sure that they also have a digital footprint is extremely important, and a new way to preserve the cultural richness of our world globally. There are indeed very tiny languages. I mean, in Vanuatu, I think they speak 120, and their population is 250,000. So you see, we have a lot of work to do to make sure that digital really represents the wonderful global culture, what we have in analog world. Thank you for listening, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Mitchell.
A very good morning to everyone, and thank you, High Commissioner, Madam President. I'm very happy that the High Commissioner and his office have chosen Tallinn as the place to launch the guidelines. I think it's very fitting, and it's also a great opportunity to get us all together. When the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe was founded now almost 45 years ago, just more or less 80 kilometers to the north from here, it recognized that human rights actually are a very vital and very important part of security, both within countries but also internationally. This place here, this venue where we are today, has a very rich military and industrial history, but today it's emerging as a cultural hub, the center of the artisan community, and it's a place that has very rich nightlife also, and as such it's a place to enjoy tolerance and diversity. Also offline, actually, which is somewhat unusual for Estonia these days. For Estonia, it's very important that the human rights are protected both online and offline, and we believe very much also in the access to internet as a sort of human right already, and we believe that it comes with a lot of opportunities as well as obviously certain responsibilities. Access to the information online has been a great enabler for making societies more equal and providing communities with access not only to information but also vital services. The information society, or in the information society, I believe we need to have critical thinking to learn how to navigate between different platforms, and as Madam President already said, media literacy here and digital literacy is a very important component of that. There are massive amounts of information. The amount of information that we have access to today is not twice or 3 times the amount that we could access just a couple of generations ago. It's thousands of times. And it's therefore also the duty of governments to protect that vastly expanded informational space. The launch of guidelines in Tallinn is the result of very good cooperation that we have enjoyed with your office, High Commissioner, and yourself. And I know that you are no stranger to Tallinn, having been here twice, and I'm very happy also that you have this time, even though the roads are slippery, to see around a bit. Estonian authorities obviously invest a lot of energy and a lot of resources into the integration of minorities, and I think that we have achieved considerable success and considerable progress over the years, and we believe that the integration of minorities is obviously the responsibility of the states in which the minorities reside. It's also natural that the countries where those minorities originate feel special affinity to them, and we do to Estonian expatriate community. Obviously, the internet provides also new opportunities, new chances to communicate with our expatriates abroad, and we believe that this interaction should be done in such a way as not to undermine the integration efforts of the countries in which the minorities reside. The role of multilateral organizations, despite certain limitations, is to be a forum for dialogue and foster the process where we can reiterate our values and principles, and we believe that strong independent OSCE institutions obviously strengthen the work of the organization as a whole. And we believe that your office, High Commissioner, plays an outstanding role in early warning and conflict prevention and democracy building and promotion. The world is a very complex place these days, and becoming increasingly more complex. We very much believe that we need to invest what we can into preserving and in strengthening the multilateral rules-based international order, and the freedom of media, the freedom of information is actually very important enabler and also very important principle here. So I believe that it's extremely timely and topical and worthwhile effort to introduce some rules and guidelines that are in nature universal and should guide us in our efforts in that direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And let me, having listened to both of you, may put forward a few considerations from my perspective. First of all, our office is not new to this area. We have some guidelines on the use of minority languages in broadcast media go back to 2003. But of course, the very fast evolution, if you want, of the media world and now the digital angle really pushed us to relook at them. So the Tallinn Guidelines are in a way building over the older ones. They're updating them, and they strive to keep them relevant in the new environment. As we focus to minorities, and the guidelines, maybe I should add, are a very, how can I say, practical tool for us to operate in an environment that is overall rather divisive. And we see this very clearly in the OSCE, where even the space of dialogue is shrinking, and the room for decision-making is also becoming increasingly constrained and limited. So the guidelines that are based on practical experience, on lessons learned, that look at best practices here and there, and also in this case, we would look at Estonian, your own best practices also when it comes to implementing them, are a good way for us to avoid a cumbersome and potentially difficult decision-making process. But then, because they are based on these good models that we see on the ground, because are based and draw on the expertise of recognized experts that have been working for a long time on these issues and agree to share their expertise with us, become an authoritative tool for us to pursue our policies and to put forward concrete recommendations to countries with which we operate. Focusing now on the minorities, and I would say it's not only minorities related, because our societies are becoming fragmented in so many ways in these days, and this applies more broadly to issues of integration of societies at large. you said, Madam President, the digital space becomes a powerful equalizer and is empowering also smaller groups, which is very true and which is very good, because it gives a space for also for minorities and for smaller groups to express themselves, to put forward their own considerations, their own thoughts, to interact with each other, regardless also of geographic bounds. So there is also a transnational element of this, which is in itself very positive, but which also may contain dangers. And as we are looking now at the new way of developing relations, and also the new kinds of crises and conflicts that arise, that are very different from what we used to see, and what has become also the source of our own policies to prevent them. We need to be creative also in developing new ways to counter the risk of conflict, including conflict that might be fostered through initiatives in the digital space. So this makes it very difficult to find a line between guaranteeing the right to freedom of expression, which is very much at the basis of everything we do here, but also ensuring that there is no misuse in a way, and that there are certain rules, certain principles. For us, one key element remains that, of course, countries should, and we have some specific guidelines on that. We call them Bolzano-Bozen guidelines, which is the relationship between countries with regard to the respective minorities on each other's territory. And this applies also to the digital sphere. But for us, the key element is that any intervention should not complicate the processes of integration of minorities. You, Madam President, have seen that you have reached out very concretely to some of your minority groups here, including by being present yourself in the northeastern regions, and engaging more closely also with parts of your society for which the work of integration is very important. Perhaps you could put forward some considerations on the role of the media and also in the digital space in that perspective of, in a way, reaching out and being seen as reaching out and providing tools, which are language tools, education, and of course, these are all important elements of a larger puzzle that builds a stronger integration policy.
Yes, indeed, I strongly believe that these guidelines, by the way, will be very useful also to big internet companies, because we can see that our big internet companies globally are, well, trying to grasp what exactly is what we are not happy here, and what we are trying to change, and what we as politicians are trying to achieve. And to put it very shortly, this is what we want to do, is that we want to tell our people that we as politicians and responsible leaders of any nation, despite the fact that we have differences of opinion, our general objective is always the well-being and the development of our own countries and globally peace and security. It gets lost, and it actually narrows the space of a politician to have a debate, and an open debate about different options and opportunities to work towards these goals. And that is also why me, personally, everybody here in Estonia knows that I'm a national conservative by my political predisposition, social liberal though. But I am reaching, my space to have different debates is limited to actually hugging all nations. I, as a president of this country, cannot do much more anymore than, go and breach what has been actually these rafts which have been actually, well, created into the society by these divisive bubbles, what we have also in social media, but not only on social media, also in public media and political processes in general, because the effect is also coming into the analog world. If it's nice to be rude in internet, it becomes nice to be rude also on the street. And it narrows our space to debate. And this is not good, and this is what I think I want to also tell to our own people. Despite the fact that we have differences of opinion, you cannot label us as traitors, you cannot label us as somebody who doesn't care about the Estonian culture, just because we also care about the other people globally. And this is something which I see as an important thing to do. These guidelines need to be given also to big internet companies and told them that we, politicians, want our space for critical debate back, but for that they need to have more breaching debate online, because right now, I mean, they are at the one end, and I am strictly sitting at the other end, alone, and I cannot anymore debate critically. I only can hog people. This is also not good. I want my right as a critical debate maker in this country back as well. And this is, I think, quite an important message nowadays, also coming from this guideline.
Thank you, President, for this debate. Can I put Minister Mikser on the spot one moment? You presented the foreign policy priorities of Estonia yesterday in Parliament. We are looking at the United Nations now as a platform to have a bit of a, how can I say, innovative debate with regional organizations supporting the UN Chapter 8, etc., to look at new ways of preventing conflict, taking into account the changed nature of conflict themselves, and focusing on strengthening the cohesion of societies to make them more resilient to conflict, for us, is a key element. And guidelines such as this will play a key role in this. In July, we're planning an event in the margins of a high-level conference on sustainable development. To draw attention to this, inviting regional organizations. Can Estonia help us and come and bring its own experiences also there to look at how successful policies of integration can strengthen the cohesion of the society?
I very much believe we can. And actually, also within the UN framework, we have been promoting the more preventive mindset. And obviously, the more preventive mindset consists of a wide variety of different components or elements. And part of that is actually making societies more resilient. Resilience in physics, I believe I'm not I don't know much about physics, but it's basically the quality of objects to respond sort of asymmetrically to shocks. And I think it's very important to be shock resistant as a society in order to survive those very violent shocks that we occasionally experience in all parts of the world. And I think that also Estonia is a very relatively advanced digital society. Has a special interest in promoting, I was mentioning the rules-based world order, promoting this sort of rules-based global information space or digital space. And Madam President has been a great leader in those efforts globally. We have actually all successive governments who have been working very, very, very hard to promote the idea that we should be better able to govern or create international law that would apply to the digital world as well. And it's not something that is unique to Estonia. Even much less digitally developed societies face the same problems, because we are seeing two contradictory trends with the emergence of global digital society. The first is actually the universal access to information. But while the amount of information available has exploded over the past couple of decades, the capacity of the absorptive capacity of an individual has not grown. And that has allowed us to create very personalized information bubbles and echo chambers. And that actually gives an opportunity to those who would like to split our societies along very different lines. And for example, over the past certain months, there has been a lot of discussion about the role that certain social media platforms might have played in fostering the conflict in as geographically distant place as Myanmar, for example. And so I think that we should really pay a lot of attention to how we do not limit people's access to information, how we do not actually restrict freedom of information, but how we actually govern the digital world by universal rules that everyone is actually morally but also legally obliged to follow. Okay,
President Kaljulaid, Mr. Mikser, thank you very much for joining us for the opening of the event. I would like to take one final minute to show everybody the explanations we have developed just to illustrate the key points of the guidelines. It's literally 1 minute. Then we'll have a picture all together and we'll continue with the panel and the discussion. Please.
Diverse societies require space for inclusive and pluralistic interaction and debate. Media and information technologies can offer such spaces to allow different groups to interact with each other, explore their identities, and voice diverse perspectives without fear. This fosters dialogue and mutual understanding, strengthens societal integration and resilience, and reduces tensions. The OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities offers guidance on how to create, nurture, and develop the role of the media and information technologies for conflict prevention. The High Commissioner's Tallinn Guidelines on National Minorities and the Media in the Digital Age advise on how to implement the right to freedom of expression in diverse societies and enable access to a wide range of media and information technologies without discrimination. Avoid hostility towards national minorities by refraining from and by countering hate speech, disinformation, propaganda, or inflammatory discourse, within or across borders. Support and stimulate media and information technologies so that they can better cater for the linguistic, cultural, and other needs and interests of national minorities. And create and sustain a favourable environment for pluralistic debate in the digital age, in which members of all groups in society can participate.
Okay. So thank you very much again. Let's have a picture all together. If you stand up, we'll put the photographer here. Thank you.
Am I wired live? Yes, good. Oh, lovely. There we go. Well, first of all, let me begin by saying welcome. I'm Jennifer Jackson-Priest, and it is my pleasure to be able to chair what I'm sure is going to be a very lively and dynamic conversation. Lively and dynamic because I am joined by a fantastic group of experts. We have Tarlik McGonigal, who's a school researcher and lecturer from the Institute of Information Law at the University of Amsterdam. Dr. Andre Richter, who is a senior advisor from the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media. Irena Kausar, who's head of the Integration Foundation here in Estonia. Eric Ross, who is chairman of the board of the Estonian Public Broadcasting, and Dr. Katrin Tildenberg, who is associate professor of visual culture and social media here at Tallinn University. So welcome, everyone. Equally, and I'm delighted to be able to say this, we are embracing the spirit of the Tallinn Guidelines this morning. We are in a wonderful eclectic space. We have this fantastic combination of cozy and quaint with very high tech. There are smart tables seated in front of everyone and around cozy sofas and chairs. But we aren't just here in Tallinn in this wonderful real space. We are also live in cyberspace, we hope all across the 57 member states of the OSCE, and we are going to be engaging in this new digital environment as we go through today. So you'll see at various points that we will have questions, and I'll be using my digital device to get at them, coming in from online. We are also going to have video links with experts in far-flung places, so we're hoping this is going to be fast-paced and very lively. And to kick us off, Tarlik, I wonder if you could bring us up to date in terms of kind of where we are now from where we've begun. My joke of the day, by the way, quick internet search using my digital device. 2003 was the launch of something that was called Face Mash. I've never heard of it until I did the look. A year later, it was renamed Facebook. So imagine that. The same year as the previous guidelines, and here we are. And I wonder if you can bring us up to date with the new ones. Tarlik.
Well, I think you've answered your own question there. The exhilarating pace of technological change is what, as the High Commissioner mentioned in the high-level introductory panel, is what has been the driver of these guidelines. When the 2003 guidelines were drafted and completed, with their primary focus on the electronic or broadcast media, as they were so commonly known. Even when the ink was drying on the page, technology was moving forward, and that technological progress has continued relentlessly ever since. So now we're no longer in a media environment, but in a multimedia environment. And as the High Commissioner mentioned this morning already, these guidelines seek to provide a practical tool, or I would say toolbox, for states, but also for a broader community of interested parties to try and move, if you will, from the international and European legal and political standards concerning freedom of expression and minority rights, and to turn them into something operational, something practical, something that can be used on a day-to-day basis. So it's this big movement that you see in the guidelines from high principles, if you will, pie in the sky for some people, but to make them relevant and to bring them down to something that's practical on the ground. So I also tried to embrace the spirit of the guidelines in preparing, what is the key, what are the guidelines trying to do in terms of their key message and their key ambition. And I thought it would be very clever if I could present that key message in 280 characters, the length of a standard tweet. But that proved to be a very frustrating exercise because there's a lot in there. There's 37 guidelines spread over 4 main pillars. And in the end, I thought I came up with a clever solution because I recalled that on Twitter, you can also do a thread of tweets to create more space for your message. And I think that's something that taps into what the President and the Minister for Foreign Affairs said this morning. It's wonderful in this digital age that we have all of these technological opportunities, and indeed Estonia has been a leader in securing universal access to the internet as a starting point for participation in democratic society. But the opportunities in and of themselves are not enough. We have to ensure that everyone, male, female, member of a majority community or a minority community, is equipped with the skills that they need to make effective use of this abundance of opportunities that are available to us. So you can call it media literacy, media and information literacy, computer literacy, digital literacy. The name doesn't matter, but it's the acquisition of that set of skills, critical and also technological, that is crucial. Maybe the key message in 280 or so characters is that these guidelines seek to impress on states the importance of honoring their international and European and OSCE commitments to ensure that there is a favorable environment for freedom of expression and participation in public debate for everyone, and that everyone can participate in that critical debate that the President referred to this morning in an equitable way, in a fair way, and that they can do so freely, safely, and without fear. And central to the guidelines is that the media, old and new, are central to that enabling environment. There has to be pluralism. There has to be a shared forum in which different groups can speak to each other, express their ideas, articulate their identities. And in the absence of such a shared forum, you will very quickly have problems with filter bubbles and echo chambers, and these are real challenges to integration in diverse societies. So just to conclude then, because we've got great experts waiting to get their points in, I think these guidelines are rich in detail, rich in ambition, and rich in potential. And the invitation to everyone present and the broader community out there is to explore the detail, because the starting point is the experiences of the HCNM's office, but also the international standards. And what the guidelines try to do is take those standards and experiences as their starting point and try to present a range of tools that may be useful for taking things further, for improving the situation, for creating opportunities to advance all of this. And I think it's, although the guidelines are directed primarily at states, there's really a very important role to be played by a wider community, and including the internet corporations that have become so powerful as gatekeepers in today's multimedia environment. And as for the ambition, as I say, it shouldn't be a castle in the clouds. It should be something that is practical and effective on the ground, and that will only happen if everyone invests in their promotion and ensures a good uptake. And as for the potential, well, that has to be realized. That won't happen on its own, and it requires then effort from everyone involved.
Thank you, Tarlak. Well, I'm sure your Twitter follower count is going to go up now as everyone waits to see this tweet, series of tweets. I want to pick up one of the points that you made, because you rightly emphasized that a significant core of the endeavor here was to really build on existing OSCE commitments and to be directed at the OSCE member states. Now, I know, of course, Andrea, you are actively involved in the OSCE space, looking at questions around freedom of the media, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you see the guidelines feeding into the sort of work that your office does.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Good morning. It's in my personal view, it's a very important document. It is very much multi-layered in several senses. I represent a sister institution to the High Commissioner on National Minorities, the Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media, and we have different mandates, but complementing each other in order to sustain comprehensive security in Europe. And Helsinki is based on the principle of human dimension as one of the major factors of security in Europe. As a person who is not with the High Commissioner on National Minorities, I have a very strong temptation to change the title of the guidelines and to take away the word national here, because in my view, what applies to national minorities in the document should apply to any minority in society. And at least for our office, that will be the guideline, one of the guidelines of the document that is proclaimed today. All types of minorities deserve the treatment as envisioned in the guidelines. And when we talk about the human rights, including the right to freedom of expression, which we are mandated to guard and to promote, the right is usually defined as the right of everyone. Tarlak already mentioned that. Everyone has a right to freedom of expression, has a right to freedom of information, and the choice of the word everyone in international documents, in national constitutions, is not incidental. It means it's not the majority, it's not all have the right. It's not the population, it's not the nation. It's indeed everyone, and including the minorities of all sorts. And by definition, minorities are weaker than majorities, and therefore they need, again, through the same definition, stronger protection in exercising of their right to free expression and right to access to information, access to communication means, etc., etc. Today, we often hear that the human rights that exist offline should be as much protected online. In a way, speaking in Estonia, I think that we can also say that the rights that exist online should be as much protected offline today. Because, I mean, with a mix of offline and online rights, and living in the digital world, we should really think about how the rights that we exercise online should be also respected offline. We got pluralism and freedom of the media and diversity of the media, and pluralism is not about the numbers. It's not about the number of users. It's not about the number of newspapers, TV channels, etc. Pluralism is about hearing the voice of the minorities. Pluralism is about not keeping them in isolation, be it geographical isolation, political isolation, social isolation, and pluralism is about involving minorities in the dialogue in society. And I'm glad to see such ideas also in the guidelines. For example, in recommendation 12 and 17, I looked through the text yesterday. That's why I have some numbers as well. And one other important thing that we try to promote through our work is that human rights is about obligations of the state of different types. It's not just obligation of the state not to interfere with the human rights of freedom of expression. It's also about the obligation of the state not to allow non-state actors interfere with the human rights. And again, the recommendations such as recommendation 10 or 18 speak about the role of the state in dealing with intermediaries, internet intermediaries, or dealing with media concentration issues of private companies. The state has not just a role here. The state has an obligation here to guarantee that freedom of expression that exists in international documents and in national law is also respected by private entities. And the third element of the obligations of the state, which is often forgotten, is that the states should enable everyone to exercise their right to freedom of expression and freedom of the media, in particular through enabling to produce content, through enabling of access to frequencies when we speak about broadcasting, when enabling them to use the language of their choice, etc., etc. And all these elements are also in the recommendations, and I refer to recommendation number 13 and the recommendation number 26 in particular. One important obligation which I was very much happy to see in the text of the recommendations is a recommendation that the states have an obligation to develop media literacy. Media literacy is very important in the context of national minorities and national minorities' rights and the use of digital media, because minorities are often ignored in the drive to enable population to analyze media and to be able to understand media content. And it is very important that minorities in their own languages are enabled to do such a thing. It is important for the minorities, but it's also important for the nations at large. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. I think you make a very important point, which is, of course, that the guidelines are indeed relevant to everyone. And I think in particular, we see this when we ask questions around integration. And obviously integration involves not only minorities, but also majorities. And there's a strong sense, I think, where we can read the latest guidelines in the context of the Ljubljana guidelines on the integration of diverse societies. Irina, I know you work very extensively on questions around integration, and I wonder if you could say a few words about how you look at the role of the media in integration in Estonia.
Yes, of course. I think that we are all in one sphere, that we're sure that media play in everyday life very, very important role, and the influence is very, very big. It's clear that media is like mirror of society. It's true. The media plays a major role in the field of integration. I can speak about Estonia, but I think that other countries more or less in same situation. Our study shows that society in the country, in Estonia, is growing more and more cohesive, but unfortunately we still have two different society. It's language society, it's cultural society, educational, it's labor market, and all of these areas life are closely linked, and of course media among them. Local media is available in Estonia in Estonian and in Russian, and increasingly also in English too. But in regions that are home to larger number of Russian-speaking people, the local media is predominantly in English, not in English, not yet, in Russian and in Estonia. Everyone enjoys equal opportunities to consume the media they prefer. It's clear. There is no discrimination in this regard. And what is a very good point, I think, that state itself has contribute to the creation of media channels in different languages. For example, Radio 4, very popular Russian-speaking radio in Estonia, or ETV Plus. It's more and more popular too. I think that differences in media consumption arise from the fact that Russian speakers exist within the three separate information space. It's Russian media, Estonian Russian language media, and Estonian language media. But Estonians usually, they are only in one information space. This is Estonian language media. Of course, we have international media, English media. For younger people, it's more and more available. And I think that main picture in Estonia, it is almost 70% of Russian-speaking population of the country watch Russian TV channels in their everyday life, and in the same time almost 85% of Estonian speaking population use Estonian language channels, and this led to a situation where the information being provided about key Estonian and world events sometimes a little bit different, especially when I speak about news about Russia. However, I think that very positive trend is that at local level, both Estonians and Russian exist within quite a similar information space, meaning that local media plays a very significant role, not only state media, but local media. For example, media in Northeast Estonia or Southeast Estonia, we have different newspapers, radio channels, TV channels too. Almost 85% of both Estonians and Russians claim to be well informed about local issues, and this is same information, not different information. The importance of the media in the field of integration has also been demonstrated in studies. The more that people are included and involved in society and the state in Estonia, the greater they trust in local Estonian and Russian language media, both. This is, of course, two-way process. Those who find themselves more often within national information space become more positively disposed toward Estonia, and people who are more loyal to the country look beyond national channel for information. Some worries, maybe. What is worrying in Estonia is the fact that issues are sometimes reported in Estonian and Russian language media in different ways. I think this is not necessarily done in bad faith. I believe that it's not bad things, but headlines sell. And since Estonian and Russian exist within separate social space, both media strive to generate messages that their target audience will buy. As a result, people understand the situation sometimes differently, and it can increase the difference in understanding. It's like close ring. Of course, media literacy, it's very, very important. We have cross-curriculum topic in now a national curriculum. I think this is good. We have some subjects. It's good prepared, that our teachers are prepared, but it is clear that more needs to be invested in the field so to young people in the country become more critical media consumers, gaining analyzing skill, asking more meaningful questions, and etc., etc. The fact that youngers are no longer simply consumers, but have also become producers like social media, YouTube, etc., also needs to be taken into account. In summary, these 3 points, for my opinion, is very important. That means that first is in Estonia reinforcing local channels, including regional media. It's very important. Cooperation between Estonian and Russian-speaking journalists in Estonia. The more they work together, the more similar the messages will come that the media sends out. And media literacy. I think this is very, very important for both Estonians, Russians, Ukrainians, not both, but for all national minorities. I think that we can do more and more for young people in this field, but I think that we have to do not only for young people, because I think that sometimes adults need maybe more this kind of support.
Thank you, Irina. Eric, you're wonderfully placed in a way to bridge the gap between the old guidelines directed at broadcast media. You're a broadcaster here on the panel. I wonder what your sensibility is around the possibilities, but the challenges as well, in terms of broadcast media and integration here in Estonia, building on what Irina has just said.
Well, actually, I should say that there is both positive trends and examples I can draw in, but also a lot of challenges actually. So if we start from positive things, then I think we have passed quite a long way in the sense that here we settled a standard in media and in journalism. And now I can say that it took like 20 years or something, but despite the language what any journalist is using in Estonia, they have common understanding what is quality journalism, how it must be done, and also we a little bit having been a very first also in public commenting platforms, which is also quite unique globally, that everybody could comment freely without any control. Already like 20 years. Now it's rather getting less and less possible with many reasons. However, this I see that the best thing we achieved is actually that there is no difference how our journalist works, and it means that there is no, at least not only in public service media, but also in commercial media, big players. There is no such threats that big main media platforms trying to manipulate population or audience. So I think this is very important. However, how we think, what we think, how we comment the issues. As a sample, Fox Media or Washington Post differences, for example, just as a sample. This type of things or blames we don't see in here. So these main positive things, what we created, I believe, from kind of the management side. Now, if we watch challenges, then that challenge is a bit like funny even to say that with offering already 3 years in two main languages, Estonian and Russian, all media and information and also entertainment in all platforms, including TV, radio, internet, internet news, entertainment portals. However, there is a reality that to change users' commitment and habits is very complicated. It seems to be that sometimes it's in media sphere, it's even more complicated than in other consumer areas. So our challenge, especially in public media, is quite strange in this sense that if would also we try that we do in some extent we marketing or promote our services and our products, but in media sphere it's totally different than in some domestic chemistry because or kind of consumer goods, because immediately if we are a little bit too aggressive, it could be and will be translated as a propaganda. So in this sense, this is the main challenge actually right now, at least I can say in Estonian Russian-speaking media, that in order if you want to persuade people to use that more, then immediately they might have some kind of hesitations about that. What is our aim of that? So it's however, this is kind of thing how I see it and how I feel it, but it's also improving. And just one number or one sample that last October, 3 months ago, for example, local public ETV Plus, which is local Russian language TV channel, first time ever reached #1 position in number of reaching to audience in Russian language audience. It means that the share is still relatively small, so the number how often daily basis Russians use this is not well big enough as we expect and hope to be and to have, but still this type of challenge or problem we faced let's say first 3 years in this channel, that we had hypothesis that people just don't know that this channel exists or whatever. Now we actually saw that they all know the button number in the remote control, and they found it, but it takes just time to change consumer habits. We must take one more last thing, that also this target group and consumers by age is really relatively old also. So majority of TV consumers and also radio consumers are up to 50 years old. So, and of course, as I understand, being also old already, that the change our habits is quite not so easy, and that you don't even have to do it, or you don't like to do it. So this main challenge what we have, and we're working in it, I believe that it just takes time, and if something doesn't happen, something accidentally or something really bad, then I believe that within few years we also can take this gap, and we cannot even say that there is different opinions in this pattern. Thank you.
Thank you. The whole question of users, of course, and users and producers, and the blurring between the two of them is pivotal in all of this. When we have the traditional broadcast media, there was a clear gatekeeping function that could be had through editorial control and so on. But as Irina has already said, when we get into the new social media space, that disappears. And I'm wondering, therefore, Katrin, if you could say a little bit about how you see Estonia in the context of the challenges of new media, social media. You know, we've already referenced the bubbles and the echo chambers. How do you see that playing out here?
I think before we get to the specific Estonian case, we need to think a little bit about the kind of broader situation, which is arguably the same globally, because these players are global, right? So I was really happy to see multiple references to internet intermediaries in the guidelines, but I think it's really important now then for all those states or institutions who try to take up the guidelines and operationalize them to think of how to actually bring some of those guidelines towards intermediaries to life, because the reality of the fact is that these are privately owned corporations that have more power and more money than many nation states, right? So how do we get from kind of imploring them to have goodwill to actually thinking about how to regulate them or thinking about how their responsibility should grow proportionately to their size, especially as they, as we see, increasingly displace other central venues or values for public life. So we should be thinking about whether their monopolistic power, which we see accumulating as some social media platform owners buy other applications or platforms, in particular areas of public life, if that can be avoided, right? And these are, you know, a little bit pie in the sky because I don't have the answers in how these can be avoided, but I know that a lot of my colleagues who are working on this internationally are trying really hard to think of different solutions, including social media alternatives or alternative social media platforms, et cetera, et cetera. Because what we need to understand is that the internet intermediaries or social media platforms, right, which are internet intermediaries per se, what their central offer is that they host and organize user content for public circulation without having produced it or without having commissioned it, right? And this is a very privileged position in terms of existing regulation, because a lot of existing regulation is about responsibility for things that you express, right? But they don't express anything. They just host and aggregate and share it. At the same time, if we look at the impacts of the content that is shared and how it is shared, then it's clear that they are not, that social media platforms are not just neutral tubes through which information flows, right? They have immense power over what is visible, what is not visible, what is kind of amplified or what becomes viral, what is hidden, where or around which topics do networked publics form, and which ones are kind of tampered down at very initial stages, right? So it is actually not true that they are merely an architecture or a structure that we fill with stuff and we have to be responsible for the stuff. So it's a very complicated issue to operationalize.
Wow, and that's so beautifully put. I mean, I'm sure as the audience has seen and as I've been listening to all of you, you've really done a fantastic job of communicating the sense of complexity of trying to do justice to rights and to respect in the context of this new environment, you know, where we have on the one hand great freedom, great opportunity, but on the other hand coming with it a need for great responsibility in making sure that we utilize the good, you know, without getting mired in some of the negative problems that could come with it. I want to open it up now to the audience. Questions for our panelists? Well then, at this point, you will see me reaching to my device. This is, of course, another sign of our age. By the way, fun fact, the first iPhone, there actually was an iPhone 1, believe it or not, launched in December 2007. So, and now we can't go anywhere without them. So, I'm going to open up my device and pull us out a question. And, oh, well, this is an interesting one. Irina, I think this one would be perfect for you. We have here a comment which says that Estonia has been conducting integration monitoring for a number of years. What do the results show in terms of media consumption among national minorities and majorities in relation to integration?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have integration monitoring. This is research. We do this each 2 years, and we can see in each research later we can see that our Russian-speaking population and Estonian-speaking population they move close to each other more and more. They are more and more use same media sphere. Especially young people, especially in social media, because Estonians little bit more in Facebook, but approximately 50% of our Russian-speaking young people now in Facebook too, and of course they have other social media channels too. Maybe I am not a specialist in this because I use only Facebook, but if we speak about TV channels or radio channels, of course young people today don't use TV channels, but it is not a problem, integration problem. It is social media and other question, and more Russian-speaking population use in their everyday life our Estonian Russian-speaking media. More and more, of course, Estonian-speaking media too, because I think that one our success story is that more and more young people can speak Estonian fluently, and when they can speak Estonian language, of course, they choose Estonian channels too. Of course, in our everyday life, especially before election, we have election in March, in early of March, and of course, this topic again and again very interesting for all politicians and other people. But I think that topic integration is are we successful in integration policy or not? And I believe that we are quite successful, and like I said, our people can speak more and more Estonian language. And what is very good tendency, in my opinion, that approximately 85% of young people feel that Estonia is their homeland. It's Russian-speaking young people. And if they feel that Estonia is their homeland, of course they are interested in this media, of course they are interested in social media to be connected with Estonian young people. Of course they use more Estonian radio and TV channels too. And I think that this is, and regional media, I told a little bit in my previous speech, and I think that this is very important too, that people in regional areas, in Northeast Estonia, for example, they are in same information environment. They know local issues in same way, and this is tendency. More and more we are in same influence. But of course we have challenges too, and the challenge, of course, to maybe not after 2 years, maybe after 10 years, I can say that all people in one media sphere in Estonia. I don't know it's possible or not, but I would like to believe this.
That's fantastic. There's lots of interest online actually in Estonia, which is great to see. It's clearly an interesting case. I'm being signaled that we have a video engagement coming up next, so I think we're going to play a video. And again, further evidence of us embracing the new digital reality. I think it's about to play. This is, of course, dramatic pause for effect. Here we go. Okay.
Hello?
Yes, hello. Hello. Tom,
can you hear me?
We can hear you, and we can even see you, so welcome. And hello from Tallinn this morning. And I hope that you have been listening on the live streaming. And I wonder if we can now bring you into the conversation.
Yes, first of all, thank you for a very interesting discussion and for many very relevant points. And also thank you for these guidelines, because they are, of course, a very welcome updating of earlier instruments in this field, particularly if we compare them to the earlier guidelines on broadcasting. The whole concept of media is now broader, much broader than before. We can see the same development, for example, when we look at what is going on in the Council of Europe when we look at, for example, monitoring of the Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. But I would have a question relating to this, because much of the discussion so far has been on skills, competencies, and that is use and demand. As I see it, the technical development that we see is much, much broader than media today, as we understand media today. We have such things as the Amazon Alexa and things like that are coming into the picture, and we see a future where so much of everything we do will be done over what then could be media. And my question actually to Dr. Tallinn and to Dr. Richter, Andre Richter, would be how long will it take until we need to further develop our definition of media from what we do now? Because as already President Kaljulaid expressed, this is an important part of activity in society today, that people are invited from the point of view of supply, that they have a supply that they can relate to, for example, in their own languages, over all the different platforms that are emerging. And I would claim that what we see is a total change of society, not only of the media sector. Could you please comment on this?
Well, fantastic. So already a pitch for a third media guidelines, perhaps. I don't know who would kind of care to answer Tom's question first. Yep.
Well, of course, the facetious answer would be, yes, we have to keep it interesting and we have to ensure that there's work to be done in the future as well. But I think you're, more seriously, I think your point is absolutely spot on. Thank you. The changes that we see taking place before our very eyes are very, very fast. They're very ongoing. It's very difficult to predict where they will lead to. I think, to address your point and your concern, it's important maybe to stand back from this immediate set of guidelines and position them in the longer cycle of thematic work by the High Commissioner's Office, because previous focuses in that body of thematic work includes effective participation and integration in diverse societies. And the scope of those thematic initiatives is broader. So there's, and I think this was one of the aims of the current guidelines, there's a complementarity between them. So whereas the present guidelines focus on media in the digital age, there is indeed, as you say, a broader context of technological change, which has implications for e-governance and a range of other concerns. So I think there are some references to the broader context in the guidelines, in particular e-governance, but I think it's very important what you've just said about keeping an eye on these developments and seeing if there are particular angles from the perspective of the HCNM and the mandate of the office to intervene, to supplement these further. And I think that's maybe one of the nice challenges that we face. I mean, these standards will undoubtedly be supplemented in the future, but these are issues that are very much alive, and we have to be vigilant about them.
Yeah, I would like to add briefly. While I agree with Tarlak that observing the rights of national minorities in the media is an ongoing process, and it will develop together with the development of technologies. From the perspective of freedom of the media, there is not big change. I mean, if you look at the guidelines for broadcasting and the current guidelines, they're not dramatically different. And from the point of freedom of the media, media is not just a new gadget or another gadget. Media is a generally speaking technological possibility for a person to express himself or herself, and not just express himself or herself, but to use this technological means in order to be part of a meaningful political process, first of all. So freedom of the media is first of all for political realization, for political existence of a human. And therefore, the technological means are not so much important. Thank you.
Could I just make a short comment, Andrei? Because I think your answer is to me very, very interesting. And I would consider the media sector and the developments in the media sector to be more than political. It will be a question of life and death for people in the future, whether or not they are in this ecosystem and if they can participate equally and effectively in the digital ecosystem. And then the question for me becomes a little bit broader.
Well, if I could, really in 280 characters, to address both of your contributions, I think we have a fixed point on our horizon, and that is the international standards, the firm principles behind those international standards. But the instruments in which those standards are enshrined are living instruments. So it's very important as technologies change that we keep those big overarching principles under review and rethink them where necessary to make sure that the rights that everyone enjoys are effective in practice. And taking your point about life and death, the President mentioned earlier that digital is a wonderful equalizer. I think the challenge for us, which you are adverting to, is to ensure that digital doesn't become a terrible excluder. And this is something that we have to keep in mind as well.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for these answers.
Tom Mooring from joining us. Obviously on that point as well, as the final comment from me, we're so far talking about Twitter and Facebook and so on. Big rise of things like WhatsApp, where it's completely opaque, and how in the world do you monitor that? And I say this as a parent of a 13-year-old who's constantly on WhatsApp, so you can certainly see the general direction of travel. I'm now kind of looking out into the audience. Again, I don't know if anybody would like to come in this lively conversation.
Right.
Yes?
Over there.
Where? No. Please.
Thank you for this interesting conversation and presentation. My name is Vitaly Popov. I'm counselor of the Embassy of Ukraine in Estonia. My question is, last year, probably you heard about this awful situation. Russian Federation made a military attack to Ukrainian seamen in Azov Sea. After this occasion, Ukraine had to impose some sanctions against Russian Federation, including carefully check of the Russian passport holders who are planning to cross Ukrainian state border. And after this military attack in Azov Sea, it was three official statements from Estonian side. The first statement was in the same day from His Excellency Mr. Sven Mikser that Estonian accused this situation. Next day, Monday, it was official statement of Mr. Jüri Ratas that Estonia accused the situation, and the next day, Her Excellency Miss Kersti Kaljulaid also made the same statement. I received a call from Estonian Road Transport Association, it's non-governmental organization, that we've got a lot of drivers who are holders of Russian passport, and we're warning about possibility to cross Ukrainian border. I stress that we are trying to do the best, but it was not our fault. It was illegal action from Russian side. And this lady stressed that, yes, we know it, because we received information from official statement of our president, official statement of our foreign minister, and our prime minister. We know what's happened. It is clear for us. From your point of view, my question is, what is the role of official politicians to create a really good society, good information, to block some so-called blackmail? Is it understandable?
Yes,
Thank you so much.
I don't know who would like to answer that one.
It's not really a media question.
Yeah, media question.
There is no ideal world.
Andre?
I mean,
Yeah, well.
that's probably the answer is there is no ideal world. Of course, we would like all to be happy and free and live in a democratic society, but that doesn't work that way.
Presumably that underscores again the importance of the guidelines, giving us a kind of toolkit to deal with issues like this. Perhaps Tarek, you'd like to come in on that.
The guidelines try to be broad enough to countenance and be able to in some way deal with different situations that could arise, and the situations that do arise can be very, very specific in terms of the factual circumstances. But one thing that is very strong, and this is the driver of this, is the mandate of the High Commissioner, that the media and also social media, but also state officials and a whole range of actors can play crucial roles in providing quality information and diffusing other types of information. And what's referenced in the guidelines is a raft of OSCE commitments which give different ways in which everybody can assume their responsibilities and in that way contribute to an environment in which there is a favorable exchange of views that isn't disruptive in different respects. And I think this is one of the objectives of the guidelines as well, to sensitize all the different players to their responsibilities. And it's an invitation to reflect further on what practical measures they can take in concrete situations to make the situation better. So it's the realization of the potential of these guidelines is going to be very much a work in progress, but hopefully it provides some sort of reference points to inspire further action.
And obviously read in the round in terms of already existing
Yeah.
OSCE commitments.
Yeah.
I think we now have another colleague ready to join us. We welcome Sergiu Constantin from URAC in Bolzano. I think about to appear on our screens any second.
Hello, my name is Sergiu Constantin.
I'm
a researcher
him on
at the
the little
Institute for
screen.
Minority Rights of URAC, a research center located in Bolzano, Bozen, the
That's
capital of the
good
Italian
morning.
autonomous province of South Tyrol. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Office of the High Commissioner and the whole team of experts who elaborated this really timely set of recommendations. Now, speaking about the topic of the Tallinn recommendations, I think it goes without saying that Internet presents some great opportunities for minorities. For example, by providing platforms for social networking or by supporting the use of minority languages in various fields such as education. So technology could be used to bring minority languages to a wider audience. However, with this development of the digital technology, we also run the risk to create some new inequalities. I think everybody is aware that nowadays minority media is struggling to survive all over Europe. And in the context of this so-called digital revolution, minority media faces some specific challenges. And I know this directly from the experience of Midas, which is an association of daily newspapers in minority and regional languages, which has the headquarters here at EURAC. In fact, in the last years, several minority dailies simply closed down, and others announced that they will not be printed anymore in the future. In the near future, will have probably only online versions. Now, my research follows a comparative approach, and I often focus on the interplay between the OSCE and the Council of Europe. And I know, for example, that the position of the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities is that the online media, the online minority media cannot completely replace the conventional printed media, as the access to internet of some minority communities is difficult or even impossible. And here comes my question, basically. I would like to ask you how minority media organizations can make the best use of the Tallinn recommendations in order to address such specific challenges linked to the ongoing process of digitalization of the printed minority media?
All right, so there we have a question, wanting us to reflect on the continued importance of print media, even into the digital age. Tarek, I think this is probably one for you again.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing these insights and your question. Another difficult question. I might just refer to some excellent work that's been done by Professor Mooring, our previous speaker, on the complementarity of different types of media and their ability to adequately serve the needs and interests of minority communities. The focus of your question is on print media, and I think it's important for us to realize that not all types of media are simply interchangeable. We use different media for different purposes, and we use them in different ways. And it's important also, with Andre's point earlier about pluralism being qualitative, that you've got a sufficient range of media available in order to meet your needs as a minority group, but also as individuals within that group. I think the usefulness of the present guidelines would be the emphasis that it places on the need to incentivize the production, dissemination, and promoting the prominence of minority media, including in minority languages. And again, this is something which appeals to the good offices of states and other actors who are in a position to do something about it. But the fact that it's in the guidelines will hopefully provide a tool for lobbying and advocacy purposes to try and ensure that would lead to meaningful support, ideally financial, but if not, at least in other respects, to ensure the vitality of print media. So I hope that it will at least provide a basis for more effective advocacy in that regard.
I guess a part of that as well is also pointing to digital divide issues, isn't it? I mean, in part, the saliency of continued print media, owes itself to the fact that not everyone can necessarily access the online world as easily as others, whether because they lack the kind of connectivity devices to do it, or the infrastructure just doesn't exist in their area, the high-speed kind of broadband access that you need. So obviously, this whole range of other issues as well is clearly implicit in a big way in terms of the guidelines and what they're trying to do with.
Yeah.
And explicitly, absolutely. Any other questions or comments from our audience here? And if not, I will go back to the website. Yes, I see a hand up, and I should say, please do introduce yourself before you give your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Jadjen Ferenci, and I'm representing the Cabinet of the Ministerial Commissioner for Neighborhood Policy, Hungary. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants for this valuable contribution to the discussion. My question would be general. I see from the program that you represent the academic sphere and the non-governmental sector. So how do you see your own possibilities, and in general, how do you see the role and possibility of the intergovernmental sector to help the government to respect the recommendations formulated in the guidelines, or in more general, not only the OSCE guidelines, but much has been said about the norms and standards of the Council of Europe. So how the civil sector, the academic field can help and assist the member states to respect these norms. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I start us off?
Please.
I was actually just thinking about something on those lines when I was reading the guidelines, because I was looking at what was cited in the guidelines, and primarily what was cited in the guidelines was other guidelines, and not really academic research, which I'm sure has gone into all of those previous guidelines and this guideline as well, but the kind of explicit network of references and interactions is that policy documents talk to each other and academic documents talk to each other, where it is clear, at least in this case, in the case of these guidelines, there is an abundance of cutting-edge, really good quality research going on right now, both in terms of broadcast media integration and internet intermediaries. So there is research existing on all of this. And there is academics who are definitely interested in having these conversations. I am assuming that there's also government institutions who are interested in having these conversations. What academics can maybe bring, because guidelines are always a very macro structure. They have to be applicable across different conditions. So there is this necessary generalization. What can happen is that there are so many studies that are in specific countries or international, but for very specific use groups. For example, minority youth who live in intercities across Europe, and how do they use applications like WhatsApp and Snapchat, right? So these very specific lived circumstances that perhaps immediately do not, the title of the research may not be "this is about national minorities," but this will very fruitfully speak to the things that are in the guidelines towards operationalizing them. For example, I was thinking about this recent research that colleagues in America have done on disinformation and misinformation and polarization on the internet, and how we need to look at it as a socio-technical problem that must have a socio-technical solution, which means that this includes both social systems and technical systems, which means that we look at first the actors spreading misinformation or polarizing items, and we look at why they do it. And there's a lot of research on that, and we know that they do it because, at least partially because it supports their pre-existing beliefs, but they also do it in order to signal an identity to other people, right? So it is about them and not really about the politics. It is about how I want to be seen among other people. Then what gives the messages that are polarizing traction is that the ones that become popular, again, there's this swath of research on it, are the ones that engage with what are called deep stories or grand narratives of hurt and injustice to my people, whoever I consider my people to be. And then finally, there's the technical layer, which usually is talked about using the term affordances, right? And this is where we know that algorithms that regulate visibility, recommendation algorithms, things like that, and the social sharing that is incited by the platforms, because this is what makes them money, these massively increase the scale and the spread of all kind of problematic communication, right? These are theoretically 3 different bodies of work. Nobody expects institutions to be able to put this together, but there are academics who are already putting it together. So I think there is already a lot of kind of practical, or at least one step before practical information out there that just has to be utilized.
Yeah, absolutely. An excellently comprehensive answer. Tarlek, did you want to come in on this as well? Some of your own
I think if I may be so forthright, I think this sounds like the first success story of, the first concrete success story of the launch. I appeal to everyone to view the guidelines from their own perspective and see how they can take them forward. And I think this sounds like a very concrete example of more leadership coming from Estonia. You're going to organize an academic conference to embed this in a broader, more academic setting. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a voluminous scholarship and a fast-growing scholarship on all of these issues, all different angles. I think primarily the format of these guidelines and previous guidelines and recommendations was such that it would be quite self-referential in terms of the standards that are out there. The driver was that these are the existing commitments of states, whether legal or political. So sometimes we're familiar with those provisions, we can quote them chapter and verse. Other times they're less familiar, we need to be refreshed about what they involve. But I think these guidelines try to have a contemporary and forward-looking interpretation of the standards that are there. And those standards can be very disparate. So hopefully they bring them together in a coherent way. Also, there was a concern not to be too academic in the sense that they have to be practical in practice. But that is in no way to downplay the importance of academic scholarship that's out there and that informs them, just as the concrete day-to-day experiences of the High Commissioner's team and contacts have informed them as well. So there are some limitations maybe as to the format, but there are also great opportunities for taking it forward, and I'm encouraged by your comments that this will happen. Thank you.
Great. Well, briefly, and then I think I'll take another question from our website.
Very briefly, I think part of the question was about the role of intergovernmental organizations. I think in this context, the guidelines, first of all, the guidelines is a starting point. It's not the end in itself. I mean, this should be also understood that it is to provoke more discussion and more stakeholders to be involved in the process. I think the role of intergovernmental organizations is to accumulate ideas on particular issues from experts and suggest agendas for national governments in implementing or in dealing with these ideas. And in this regard, I think Tallinn Guidelines is a very good example.
All right, thank you very much. I'm conscious of wanting to make sure that we're inclusive of our online audience as well as our real space audience. So I'm just going to throw out a question from online and then we will come back to the actual audience. Eric, I think this is one for you. And again, it shows how much interest there is in Estonia online. Question is, how can the media learn from the experience of some countries, such as Estonia, in countering disinformation with regard to national minority issues?
Well, I think a little bit it's exaggerated that to say that disinformation issue is only a minority issue. I believe it's rather opposite. But of course they are parallel problems, and as I also mentioned before, that I believe this kind of nature, our main minority background belief, if I would say so, was that coming from, as myself, from Soviet heritage background, because in Soviet era, the media, okay, we didn't use this word at all, but journalism as it is, was a part of propaganda or aim of how to explain to the nation the goals of politicians, more or less to say. So it means that all the older generation people who has this long experience, they has a bit complication to change this understanding and to understand that there is really free media. Now it's getting this also in social media terms that. Like it was also mentioned by Reena, that in Estonian case, for example, more than half of our minority is rather using a Russian-oriented social media, namely two biggest of them of Kontakti and Odnoklassniki. So and rather a younger generation, like Reena mentioned, switching more and more over to Facebook. So in this sense, it's not good or bad as itself, but as it was told also that this kind of, let's say, dispute about how platform is platform, and when until this is only any social media is only platform and kind of aggregator, then it's at least theoretically simple way, even if it's simplified. But how we see also and know much better about Facebook nowadays, and the main owner and founder is Mark Zuckerberg also accepted and acknowledged that they are using algorithms to present the information also in different forms and in different categories. So it means actually that in very many cases, in most cases, I should say, this information is not wrong. But if you add this really in big proportions, the one tendency, then people tend to start to believe it. So it's so simple, and I believe we definitely must not have so naive that we don't believe that the guys in Kremlin doesn't use this formula. I believe they are, I assume they're a little bit ahead actually, but we don't know that exactly yet. So in this sense, it means that all this, but the good thing I believe it's here is that all these kind of tricks, is it trolley fabrics or whatever, you can use only once or twice max. So if we understand how it works, then they have to learn next manipulation instruments. So in this sense, we are more and more mature as a consumers, also as mediators and media players, but also it's very sure and certain that new tricks waiting around the corner. So we just must be ready, and we must be hesitational. I'm a little bit maybe too optimistic or too this way that that from media and journalist perspective, I must say also it's a little bit like seeming sometimes and quite often that that this kind of lazy excuse for journalism. We have some false facts or whatever. It's a little bit excuse for doing not good journalistic work, because this job must be done and must be done always. So nowadays, if everybody can be kind of social media journalist, then it's also it's like gut feeling rather, but especially younger generation journalists a little bit also allowed themselves to let the standards down. Okay, I got this news from somewhere and it's okay, but it doesn't help them, or it cannot be excuse not to work properly. And I should say, at least in Estonia, that we, like I mentioned before, that we set the standards by the journalistic managers, the chief editors, and this cannot be like a let behind. And until you do this job properly, then this threat is much weaker. Either it is still there.
Thank you. I know we have one question over here. Do we have any other questions in the audience at this point? In which case I will gather up several. Yes, then here. And please do introduce yourself. There should be a little button.
Hello, I'm the ambassador of Spain. My question is, I want to thank the High Commissioner and this vivid debate today here. My question is on the procedure. What is, because the High Commissioner said that these Tallinn guidelines are built on other guidelines. What is exactly the added value of these Tallinn guidelines? Is it the first time that we have these guidelines or the idea of these guidelines on digital age and minorities? In that case, we are in the place, definitely Tallinn is the place to talk about this. And another thing is that, and excuse my ignorance, how binding it is for the countries, and if we have to sign, the countries member of the OSCE have to sign these guidelines. I mean, it's just, we here in Tallinn, maybe we are not so much aware of your procedure. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Well, Tarek, I think these are perfect questions for you.
Unless the High Commissioner would
wish to.
Well, I'm sure I will be corrected if I put a foot wrong. These, I think these guidelines are unique in terms of the breadth of issues that they try to deal with in one place. So, you know, you have various international and European standards that might focus on or have important focuses on freedom of expression or minority rights, but to bring both of those big components together with an emphasis on the media, but not just traditional media, institutionalized media, but also the growing range of other media that are used to contribute to public debate or to obstruct public debate in some cases. And also, and I think this is the real, one of the real unique elements, the mandate of the High Commissioner to try to see how these technologies can be used to prevent the emergence of conflict or the escalation of conflict, or if there has been a conflict, how to resolve that conflict. And the media can create a shared space in which different groups can come together, or if there is harmful or objectionable content, they can also polarize. So I think that's the terrain that these guidelines try to navigate. And your question, as the second prong to your question, as to whether they are binding, no. And I don't think that I said they were ambitious, but they're not that ambitious. I think they're very pragmatic. They are inspired by a range of legally binding and politically binding commitments that apply to in many cases, all OSCE participating states. In some cases, they may be they may be based on Council of Europe standards or EU standards, so they would only be reference points rather than hard legal commitments. But that's all in the background. What the guidelines tries to do is to emphasize the OSCE commitments, which are directly relevant and a source of major guidance for all participating states. And it tries to interpret them in a way that's relevant to the subject matter and with an eye on ongoing changes. So I think there's, at different levels, it's quite a unique coming together of topics and standards, and the fact that they're all in a one-stop shop, that they're all in one place, I hope will make them useful and relevant to a wider community of actors. Again, getting back to the toolbox metaphor.
Right, thank you, Tarek. We are down to our final couple of minutes. I'm going to very quickly invite each of our panelists to give, this is a challenge, 1 minute or less, maybe it's only 60 or 70 characters, Tarek, the final takeaway message, final thought you'd like to leave with our real space and cyberspace audience. And would you like to begin? We'll just go around, collect them up.
All right. One last temptation that I have with the title of the guidelines, I think they should be also called not just Tallinn Guidelines, but timely guidelines. And I think in answer to your question also, Ambassador, the point is that international standards are there for decades. Interpretation of the standards to the contemporary world, that is what is important today for politicians and for the public in general. And we didn't speak about it particularly during this discussion, but the question of not just technological changes which happened in the past 15 years, but also the question of political changes is very much dominant on what is being discussed. And I'm very glad that the guidelines deal with the question of disinformation and propaganda, which is a huge threat today to the international peace in the region, unbelievably huge threat. And the minorities, national minorities, are very often both the target and the instrument of such propaganda and disinformation. And in this way, I'm very much happy that the guidelines deal with this issue in a very thoughtful and balanced way.
Thank you. Irina.
Yeah, we have guidelines. Implementation always is a harder and longer process than write guidelines. I think that, like we said, this is not the end, but this is only start. I believe in cooperation between politicians and non-political sector, cooperation because between academical sector and non-governmental organization, cooperation between national minorities or not national minorities, but minorities and majorities. I think that it's very, very important to speak with each other about these topics in these guidelines. And if I think about my work, everyday work, I can do this kind of activities. That, yes, I believe cooperation and cooperation in implementation these good recommendations.
It's a toolbox. Maybe some of the tools had been mislaid. The challenge was to get as many tools into the toolbox as possible. Some of the tools needed a little bit of sharpening, some of them needed a little bit of polishing, and we needed a little bit of an instruction guide to go with the tools about how to use them. So very much in the spirit of cooperative endeavor, which is also strong in the guidelines. My challenge for everyone, the hope that I would have for the guidelines is that people start looking at the tools that are in there and thinking how could they best use them themselves in their own situations. It's not like a legally binding text where everything has to be implemented, but hopefully, as one of the speakers earlier this morning said, there's food for thought and hopefully ample food for thought. Thank you for your interest.
Kind of in line with Andre's kind of reframing, you call them timely guidelines. I have been thinking ever since the question about kind of technological advances about the connections and differences between media and mediation, or media and mediated. So perhaps these are less guidelines for media in the digital age, but these are guidelines for public sphere in the networked or digitally saturated world, which is partially mediated and partially not, in some cases mediated by kind of conventional institutional media, and in other cases mediated by communication technologies. So basically what we're talking about is we're talking about sociality and communication and interaction in this world that is inherently mediated by medias, both old and new.
Thank you. Eric.
Well, as I'm not deeply familiar yet, so I have a bit complicated to comment that in details, but I rather believe, yes, that it's good to have such kind of overall and explanatory, is quite well explained. Also the background why this or another point is here, and there is also one threat, let's say this way, that as it's general, it must be general, otherwise it cannot be here. Is also I see already in the short future that certain points will be described differently, and both opponents will find excuses from the same book. So in this sense, it's not only dialogue but also the dispute that is following going on. But I believe still, if we have all this material in one book, then it's very good basis where we can at least we don't talk about everything in all times, but we have something, and we can a little bit like negotiate and improve. And I believe it's the way, at least in the first glance, how it is seem to be here, that it's more or less most of the relevant and important things at this moment is covered, and it's really good point to move on. Thanks.
Well, on that note, I'm going to conclude by reminding us of the spirit of the guidelines, which the infomercial so poignantly put forward. This is an effort, of course, to create a plural space where many voices can be heard and can be respected. And I want to thank everybody who participated in, I think, a conversation that lived that reality. Our participants on the platform, our conversationalists here in Tallinn in this lovely intimate space, our conversationalists online, those that joined us by video, obviously our very distinguished guests, the High Commissioner, the Minister, the President, and not least, clearly our wonderful panel who added such richness to our understanding. So thank you to everybody, and I think we now have the final comments, closing remarks, and the rest of us will disappear.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jennifer.
So we've come to the conclusion of our event. I myself will put forward some personal considerations, and I will also pick on some of the issues that come up to share with you my own views. But before we do that, we have a very active, engaged chairmanship of the OSCE this year, Slovakia. Mr. Lisak, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Slovakia to the OSCE, has kindly accepted to join us all the way from Vienna today. So welcome, and I would like also to give him an opportunity to share views of the chairmanship on this event and on the issues that we have been discussing. After which we'll come to the concluding phase. Mr. Lisak.
Thank you very much, Mr. High Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone. It was indeed a great privilege to assist at this auspicious launching ceremony, the launch of the Tallinn Guidelines on National Minorities and the media in the digital age. While thanking the host country for Estonia for its hospitality, indeed, the highest political level presence at this event is a testament to the attention dedicated to this very important agenda in the country. The mandate of the OSCE High Commission on National Minorities was established more than 25 years ago. Since then, 5 different commissioners have assumed the post. As it was said by the foreign minister earlier, now in the current state of the world with the erosion of the long-established rules-based order, the mandate is no less important than ever. The guidelines introduced today are 9th in a row. And the focus from this perspective come indeed very timely, and I have to concur with the representative of the RFOM, Andre Richter. Yes, we can call this also timely guidelines. New technologies indeed open vast, virtually unlimited opportunities and gradually become a major economic driving force. At the same time, they bring about new challenges, including those of security nature. Since the publication of the guidelines on the use of minority languages in the broadcast media in 2003, circumstances definitely have changed dramatically. On the other hand, the sound, inclusive, pluralistic public debate remains very important. I was so delighted the insightful expert exchange of views on the role of the media and information technologies in today's diverse societies we witnessed just before was truly encouraging. The OSCE chairmanship is fully aware of the very hard work behind the tiny yellow book that was introduced today. Let me once again congratulate everyone that has contributed to this collective effort, and let me reassure you of our continued support. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lisak. Thank you. I'll sit back down. First of all, thank you again for joining us today. It was, I think, a really interesting event. But this is a beginning, in a way, of a new chapter for our work. I was pleased to see the attendance here in the room, but also to have from my colleagues some information on the online viewers, which appear to have been in contact with us from many directions, not always obviously here in Estonia, but we have been followed by viewers across Europe, from North America, in Central Asia. We have seen on our Facebook page the traces of a number OSCE participating states, in fact, remotely following the event. So I think it's a success, and it's good also to see that in a digital world and with this online tool, so we managed to reach out such a broad audience. I would like to come back to the one issue that was raised in particular by the Spanish ambassador, which is the guidelines. And no, we're not asking you to sign anything here. So there is no obligation in strict terms. This was not a negotiated text. It's a set of, as we call them, guidelines or recommendations. But this is, as it has been pointed out, part of my toolbox. This is where my mandate comes in. My mandate has been agreed, negotiated, agreed, and signed up by the countries of the OSCE. And my mandate is to work towards promotion, let's put it in general ways, of integration, better integration in our societies that are growing increasingly diverse. Andrei Richter, if I'm not wrong, was saying at some point we should just talk about minorities. Why national minorities? I cannot do that really because my title and my mandate talk about national minorities. But in fact, I stay very far from any attempt to define them. Because minorities are, in a way, self-defining themselves, and one knows when one is part of a minority, whether this is ethnic, linguistic, religious, or whatever. And there are new minorities appearing. And if we talk about, for instance, social media, and the challenges that they pose to the traditional minorities, if you look at the new minorities, the challenges are very similar. And new minorities may in a way coagulate in a way around certain media tools, which might allow them to better integrate in the society of the countries where they live, or might in a way contribute to their isolation, which can influence certain ways of thinking and can influence also political processes in countries. So it is a very complicated, a very broad area where we need to step in, I think, with, in a way, a certain gentle pace, but we need to raise awareness. I think that one of the important things about the debate today is really putting the issue on the table and putting it with a number of recommendations. Recommendations are important for me as part of my toolbox because, as a number of people pointed out during the day, we live in an environment that is increasingly polarized. It's polarized, unfortunately, also within our countries. It's politically and in many other ways. It's polarized. If you come to the OSCE and you sit in a meeting of a permanent council or a ministerial council, you will see how the narratives are different, how dialogue is different, how much polarization in fact is affecting the political processes, the dialogue and the cooperation that should be at the center of a process like that of the CSE and then OSCE. So one of the good things for me as I deal with issues related to minorities or to integration of societies, and as they get more politicized as a result of this polarization, for me it is good to have a toolbox that looks a bit technical, and so that I'm not perceived as taking side for or against what a certain minority expects or what the king state expects me to do for that minority, or what the state where the minority resides thinks that I should be doing and how I should be assessing things, because I have these neutral sets of recommendations and I use them as a blueprint that is not of automatic universal application, that has to be adjusted every time to the local situation, to the local realities, etc. So for me, this is useful because it allows me to step back a little bit from the politics of the environment where I operate. But this is a tool that is not only for me, because it's a tool that I recommend to each of the countries of the OSCE to seek inspiration from as they develop their own internal policies. So it is not only for me the checklist to see how things are done and to see whether this works okay or not, but it is also something that I would like governments to do the same. and to see, as we develop a policy in this or this other area, what are the recommendations of the OSCE and the High Commission of the OSCE when it comes to minority issues? How can we use them to improve situation, to improve the processes of integration in these diverse societies, etc. And this is where also the external factors come in, and we've heard a few references to the fact that as relations become more complicated, minorities may be among the first to be affected and may even become tools in this. And it is important also to keep this in mind from every angle. So here, and that's why I look at the sets of minorities in an integrated manner across themselves. I look at education, I look at the use of language, etc. And this is a cross-cutting issue because it has to do with the tools of interaction in a way. And it's also innovative in another way because, as we were saying, we enter an environment that is more difficult to define, where the players are many, where the structures are less clear, where the roles are less obvious. So in a way, the clients and the addressees for these are not only the governments. Of course, the governments should be aware, should be part of this, but we are talking about individuals, the civil society, the corporate world. As the President was saying, we need to bring in also the private sector and some of the actors in this and the economic sphere and have a dialogue about these issues. So here, this is really broad and innovative in many ways, but it's modern, and it's something that is a snapshot. We even had to put in these recommendations at some point a clarification that these reflect the situation as of a certain date, because things are moving on, world is moving on, and so we may have to figure out how we make sure that over time we also keep the pace with the developments outside and make sure this that this is understood as a snapshot of things as they are now, and the recommendation of things as now, but it should be seen as a living document that will have additional bits coming up. One issue that I found interesting in the discussion is the question of language and how, especially with minorities, we can, and it came up also in some of the discussions and the questions, how we can encourage also diversity, pluralism, but also the use of regional languages. On the 21st of February, we will have the International Mother Tongue Day. And interestingly, and you will find it online if you follow us, there will be a little recording, a video, coming from my office with the staff of my office who will send a message, but each of us will send only a little part of that message in its own mother tongue. And the whole thing will start with me, and I confess I took the lead in this, but I will do it not in Italian, but in my own regional language, just to underline the importance of maintaining these regional languages vital. And I think we can use media and digital media also to strengthen this and to send messages in this direction on the importance also to preserve this great richness of diversity that we have in our countries and in our region. So messages in a way of encouragement to nurture this diversity as something precious that we want to keep. At the same time, being aware of the need not to be or to protect ourselves and to protect our people from the risks of being somehow affected by the larger differences which are there and which we need to take into account in our work. I would like to conclude with recognition and thanks to a number of partners that we've had in launching this event, the support of the chairmanship, of course. I mentioned the personal role that President herself had in encouraging us to go ahead. This is a discussion we had more than 6 months ago at the last Lennart Meri conference here in Tallinn, and I think her enthusiasm in a way of this idea really motivated us to go ahead. And I have to say from that point, Ambassador Kara in Vienna was very instrumental in helping us moving ahead. The foreign ministry here, but also the office of the president have been extremely supportive, and they provided us fantastic premises. I think this place is really the kind of thing we needed for an event of this kind. So I was very pleased that we could use it. I'm very grateful for having had it at our disposal for the event. The local partners, the Estonian Institute of Human Rights, the Integration Foundation, in particular, I'm also grateful for their support. This is only, how can I say, one step in a longer term, very positive and very interactive relationship, and I'm looking forward also with them to continue, and also in this occasion to continue a visit to the country, to engage also with some actors on the ground on issues, including the ones we have been discussing today, in general on issues of integration. The panelists are also very representative of the group of people who engaged with us in developing this event. Tarlach McGonigal deserves a special mention in this because he carried a heavy weight and has a great role in making this happen. So I'm very grateful to him personally, but to everybody. Jennifer, thank you also for moderating the panel today. I would like also to mention in this regard the current project coordinator in Ukraine, who is a former director of my office, Eric Vilatsen, who joined us from Kiev for this event, but he was one of the initiators of this project. So thank you, Henrik, also to you, and to all of you, and the many ones who followed us online. Thank you very much. As I said, this is a beginning. Now the hard work is coming. Thank you.